My name is Josephine. I'm 36 years old, living alone in Austin, Texas. That day, I stood in the middle of the courtroom, gripping a stack of files, listening as my own parents and younger sister declared that I had betrayed the family for refusing to share the house I bought entirely with my own salary. But what they didn't know was that the house was just a small piece of what I actually owned. They were suing me, demanding the right to live in the very neighborhood I had quietly acquired over the years, registered under a trust fund they never suspected. Have you ever been treated like a stranger by your own family just because you stopped being easy to control? Have you ever stayed silent to protect the people you love, only to realize they were the ones stabbing you in the back? If any part of this hits close to home, leave a comment below. Tap like if you believe silence can sometimes be the start of rebellion. And don't forget to subscribe, because this story doesn't end in court. I'm the eldest of two sisters, born and raised in a small house on the northern outskirts of Dallas. We weren't wealthy, but we had enough, as long as I stayed obedient and Rebecca didn't get upset. From early on, I understood exactly where I stood in the family. The one who worked, who gave up her share, who kept things running smoothly in silence. And Rebecca? She was the center of it all, the special girl, the one whose smallest frown could shift the entire household. I still remember the day I turned 8. My mom told me to give up my room for Rebecca because she can't sleep in the small one. I asked, then where will I sleep? She didn't look at me. She just folded Rebecca's tiny floral dresses and said flatly, "You're older. You should understand." So I moved into the storage room, sleeping on a folding cot beside a leaky window that soaked through every time a thunderstorm rolled in. Back then, I didn't understand why love in our house always came with conditions. I just knew I had to be good, get good grades, tie my own hair, fold my clothes, and smile every time Rebecca scribbled something and insisted it be hung on the fridge. When I got an A, my mom would ask, "Did anyone in class get an A+?" But when Rebecca got a C, she clapped like my sister had won a full-ride scholarship. "She's trying, don't pressure her," she'd say. I never argued. I just nodded and quietly went back to my books. My dad, Richard, didn't say much. But every time Rebecca strummed a guitar and sang off-key, he'd watch her like she was performing a springtime symphony. He once announced proudly in front of our relatives, "Rebecca was born to perform. Josephine, she's more of a behind-the-scenes type." I gave a polite smile. Then I went back to doing laundry, cooking dinner, cleaning the living room, and wiping the dining table so we could host guests who came to hear my sister sing bad pop songs through a cheap Bluetooth speaker. When I was 14, my maternal grandparents passed away and left behind a small house in Wichita Falls. I thought my parents would rent it out or sell it and divide the proceeds equally between me and Rebecca someday. But just a few months later, I saw a for sale sign stuck in the front yard. That money, I only heard about it in passing, was used to invest in Rebecca's future. My mom said, "She's going to Nashville for music school. She needs a chance." I stayed quiet, because I knew that if I asked, "What about my future?" Mom would just look at me with disappointment and bring up how I was difficult for not letting Rebecca copy my homework. I later earned a partial scholarship to an architecture school in Houston, but I still had to take out loans to cover tuition. I worked part-time at the campus library from freshman year, tutored at night, and interned at a tiny design firm every summer to gain experience and save money. Every month I still sent a bit home even though no one asked, because I knew Dad was between jobs and Mom was stressed about the new car loan they took out for Rebecca. For years I didn't come home during the holidays. I had shifts. I couldn't afford the bus ticket. And even if I did return, I'd just be a shadow beside the family's chosen one. Rebecca lasted exactly 1 semester at music school. Then she dropped out saying it was too much pressure, and switched to digital arts. She dropped that too the following semester. No one scolded her. No one was disappointed. My parents just said, "She's finding her path." I thought, and who's laying down that path for her now? But I didn't say it. I kept working, kept saving, kept telling myself I have to get out, no matter what it takes. When I called home to check in, Mom often rushed me off the phone. "I'm busy helping Rebecca prepare for her entrance exam," she'd say. Another time I called on my own birthday. Mom answered but asked, "Did you mean to call today? Rebecca's performing at the community center." I went quiet. Then I wished Rebecca luck. After hanging up, I realized I no longer expected anything from the other end of the line. Some days I thought I had let it all go. But every time I got a holiday card addressed only to Rebecca family, I'd feel a knot tighten in my chest. I wasn't a stranger. I was their daughter. Her sister. The one who stayed up all night knitting a scarf for Dad when he was out of work, who altered Mom's old wedding dress so she could keep it as a memory. But none of that was ever mentioned. So I wasn't surprised when they showed up at my door, smiling sweetly, only to drag me to court later. What they didn't expect was that the quiet daughter they used to dismiss wasn't so easy to manipulate anymore. And the house they tried to claim was, in fact, just a small fraction of what I'd been quietly building. I left Houston after graduation, degree in hand, student loans still heavy, but lighter than I'd ever felt. I landed a job at an architecture firm in Austin specializing in residential design. It wasn't a high position. I drafted details and built scale models. But I learned more there than in 4 years of school. I arrived earlier than most, stayed later than the janitor, and never complained about extra assignments. I wasn't drawn to the big projects. I was fascinated by neglected suburban homes, ones people had abandoned because they couldn't fix them, but to me, still held the soul of wood, brick, and time. 3 years in, I quit. Not because I was fired or frustrated, but because I wanted to do something my own way. I took out a small loan and used my savings from years of work to start over. My first project was a 2-story wooden house in southeast Austin. The paint was peeling, weeds choked the yard, the roof leaked so badly the rain flooded the kitchen. But I saw potential the seller didn't, and that most buyers didn't have the patience to notice. Took me nearly a year to bring that house back to life. I didn't hire a big company. I didn't need fancy blueprints. I drew the plans myself, assembled a small crew, and worked alongside them on every step. Every coat of paint, every window pane was cleaned and reinstalled. I kept the original bricks along the walkway, just polished them and added a simple mosaic. When it was done, a neighbor knocked on my door, stood on the sunlit porch and asked, "Are you the new owner?" I thought this place was abandoned forever. I just smiled and nodded. No one needed to know more. I later sold that house for 3 times what I paid. The profit wasn't huge, repairs had eaten up most of the budget. But I realized I could keep going. I set up a trust, named it Wren Holdings LC, after a bird I once read about as a child. Simple. Anonymous. No one could link it to me without internal documents. My lawyer handled the legal work. I stayed behind the curtain, investor, architect, supervisor. One by one, I bought 4 more homes in the same area. Most had been foreclosed or abandoned for years. I didn't demolish them, I restored them. Kept the old wooden porches, replaced the roofs, updated the wiring, planted local shrubs for low-maintenance green space. Each task felt like I was healing myself, one pipe and brick at a time. The home I live in now is part of that cluster. A corner house with 2 open sides, a small lavender garden, and a bench under an old oak tree. I didn't choose it because it was the biggest or most beautiful. I chose it because it gave me peace. The kind of peace someone who grew up between shouting matches and heavy silences truly treasures. My parents still think I rent. They never asked. On the rare occasions I called, Mom would say, "Still in that little apartment, huh? Don't you get tired of living like that?" I never corrected her. Why share my life with someone who never cared about the effort behind it? They think I scrape by. I have no reason to change that narrative. I never invited them over, until they came knocking, dragging Rebecca in an overpriced dress and a look that said it all. I knew this neighborhood would be redeveloped soon. News of the upcoming rail extension, a new park, and a community arts center had been buzzing on real estate forums for months. But I was already here. I had listened to every crack in the walls, every breeze sneaking through the windows, every story told by neighbors about New Year's on the porch. I wasn't doing this to get rich. I did it because I needed to create something lasting. Something no one could deny or take from me as easily as a cold rejection on the phone. Wren Holdings LC kept running in silence. No advertising. No website. No social media. The houses were sold or rented out with clear, fair terms. Priority given to small families, retirees, or people with modest incomes. I didn't need massive profits. I needed a community reborn. The kind of environment I was never allowed to grow up in. And in the world I had built for myself, there was no one named Rebecca. No one forced me to give up my bedroom or questioned why I needed so much space. No one laughed at my success and pretended not to notice. No one assumed I existed solely to hold others up. That's where I lived. A simple home with warm oak under my feet and quiet golden light every night. A place I thought no one would touch. I was wrong. Because they came not to apologize, not to celebrate, but to claim. And they didn't know they were about to touch the one thing I was willing to protect at all costs. That night, the weather turned unexpectedly cold, even though it was only mid-April. I had just finished watering the lavender bed in the front yard when I heard a car stop at the edge of the driveway. A familiar silver SUV, still with the old license plate my parents had back when they lived in Garland. The door opened. First came my mother, Elaine, in a long cream coat, her face stern like she'd just been called to a city council meeting. Then my father, Richard, holding a brown paper bag like he was headed to a picnic. And last, Rebecca with her curled blonde hair, a puffy red dress and tear-swollen eyes like she'd just finished a dramatic breakup scene. I hadn't invited them. There was no warning. But I still opened the door, still smiled. A habit long formed during the years I learned to keep everyone happy. Josephine, my mother said as she stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. Well, this house, it's more real than I expected. Where'd you find a place like this to rent? It looks like something out of a magazine. I set the watering can by the doorway and gently closed the door behind them. I'm not renting, Mom. This is my house. She stopped in the foyer, her eyes sweeping across the walnut-paneled wall before landing on the small chandelier in the living room. Really? You bought this place? Her tone was surprised, laced with disbelief like I was making something up just to be impressive. Yes. 2 years ago. Rebecca flopped onto the sofa, sighing like she'd hiked through a storm. I can't believe you've been keeping this to yourself. This house is so peaceful, so perfect for recovery. I looked at her, unsure what she meant, when my father spoke, his voice low and gentle like he was preparing to present something reasonable. Your mother and I were thinking, he began, maybe, during this rough time you could help Rebecca a little. She just broke up, lost all her savings because she trusted the wrong guy. She's unemployed too. You know it's not easy to get back on your feet these days. I stayed standing by the kitchen threshold, my hands resisting the urge to clench. You mean, let her stay here? Just for a little while, my mother chimed in. She's really fragile right now. You're her sister and you have all this space. There's an empty room, isn't there? My eyes drifted to the slightly ajar wooden door of the study. That room had no bed, just books, a desk, and the chair I sat in every morning to write ideas. But to them, it was simply a room without someone sleeping in it, which meant available. I took a deep breath. I'm sorry, but no. This is my home and I need my space. Rebecca looked up, eyes wide, lips trembling. You're saying, you won't let me stay? I've lost everything, don't you get that? I just need somewhere to recover. Somewhere quiet and clean. Somewhere like this. My mother leaned toward me, her face cold like a January wind. You don't have a husband, no kids, no responsibilities. Are you really going to keep all this space to yourself? Rebecca's only asking for a few months. I looked at her for a long time but said nothing. Inside me, their logic, that I had nothing to lose, was the very thing that had stripped away the worth of everything I'd built. I had lived my whole life by their rules, and now that I had carved out a quiet corner for myself, they had come, assuming it was something they had a right to divide. My father gently set the paper bag on the table and pulled out a box of pastries. Let's not fight. We came to talk. Just think about it, okay? It wouldn't be forever. No need to make this hostile. I walked to the dining table, carefully placed the pastry box in the fridge, then turned and said clearly, I've thought about it. This is my decision. Rebecca can't stay here. Silence hung in the air for several seconds. Then Rebecca burst out, furious. You're so selfish, do you know that? I thought you had changed. I thought after all these years, you'd be mature enough to help family. I looked at her. Yes, I've changed. I'm no longer the one who always gives in, always stays quiet. My mother stood abruptly. That's enough. You don't get to talk like that. We're family. And in a family, when one person needs something, the other has to give. I stood silent, but inside me something cracked. And what if I need something? Has anyone ever asked me what I need? No one answered. I stepped forward and opened the door. I'm sorry. This isn't a good time. I think we should end this here. They hesitated for a few seconds, then began to leave. My mother was the last one out, turning back with a cold, biting whisper. You'll regret turning your back on blood. I didn't respond. I closed the door, didn't feel guilty for saying no. 3 days later, I received a letter from the Travis County Court. My name sat neatly in the defendant box. The home I lived in was now being called a shared family asset in the lawsuit, and I was accused of unreasonably refusing to share access. At the bottom of the complaint were 3 signatures: Richard Grant, Elaine Grant, and Rebecca Grant. I opened the envelope with bare hands. I was too scattered to think about gloves or a letter opener. The adhesive ripped with a harsh crack, like something inside me splintered along with it. Inside was a thick stack of documents, typed in cold administrative font, filled with phrases I never imagined would be tied to my name: violation of family support agreement, denial of agreed shared usage, emotional welfare interference. My eyes stopped at a quoted line. At Christmas of 2022, the defendant Josephine Grant publicly stated, "Rebecca can always come back here if she needs." I froze. The memory of that Christmas came back. Twinkling lights, cinnamon cookies I baked, soft music in the kitchen. Rebecca had been complaining about a new boyfriend who ghosted her after borrowing her car. She groaned like the world was conspiring against her, and I, just trying to ease the tension, had smiled and said, "Rebecca can always come back here if she needs. If she's willing to do the dishes with me." A joke. A polite nod. A flicker of pity, not a legal commitment. Yet now, they were using that moment to construct something they called an implied agreement. I turned to the next page. That's when my heart truly sank. A rental contract appeared. It read, Landlord, Josephine Grant. Tenant, Rebecca Grant. Duration, indefinite until the tenant voluntarily vacates or a new agreement is made. It even had my signature, or something that tried to mimic it. I had never signed anything like this. Never discussed, emailed, texted, or agreed in any way to Rebecca becoming my tenant. My hands shaking, I placed the copy on the table and picked up my phone. I dialed Maya's number almost automatically. She was my lawyer and the closest friend I had from college. When she picked up, her voice raspy from working late, I didn't wait long. "Maya, I got a court summons. They're suing me for not letting Rebecca stay. And there's a forged lease agreement. With my signature." She was quiet for a few seconds, then her tone dropped. "Is there a witness listed?" "The old attorney from my grandfather's estate. A man named Albert Linwood." Maya let out a sharp breath. "I remember him. He was reprimanded once during an estate dispute years ago. They probably used him to file this." "Is the contract notarized?" "Yes. It was officially stamped and filed with the city. They're trying to paint me as the bad guy for saying no to Rebecca." I heard Maya typing on the other end. "You need to send me every copy. Tonight." I hung up, my heart still pounding in my chest. The contract lay on the table, cold and fraudulent, making my stomach turn. I returned to the stack of papers and went through every page. In the middle was an addendum from the city land office, confirming that Rebecca Grant had registered this house as her primary residence 2 months ago. That meant, on paper, my sister had been living here, and I had no idea. I shot up from my chair. Crossing the living room, I opened the drawer by the front door where I kept unread mail. I sifted through crumpled flyers, utility bills, and bank offers until I found an envelope labeled for Rebecca Grant. The address was mine. Underneath, in small print, it read, "New account holder. Please confirm residency." My vision blurred for a second. I leaned against the doorframe, feeling like the floor had tilted. Rebecca hadn't just lied. She had orchestrated an entire setup to claim legal residency or ownership of the home I had worked years to earn. I had never signed that lease. But if I couldn't prove it, I'd be seen as someone who broke a promise. Or worse, someone unlawfully denying access to shared property. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table until sunrise, holding that fake lease like it was a loaded toy someone had tossed into my life unannounced. Something in me had snapped, not my trust that had been gone for years, but my patience. I always thought I could avoid this. I stepped back from my family to protect myself. I never asked for anything, never blamed anyone, I just wanted peace. But now they hadn't just come for me. They staged a show, a web of forged papers, fake witnesses, hollow promises, and they wanted to turn me into the villain in the story of my own life. I opened my laptop, drafted an email to Maya. attached everything I had. Then I typed the subject line with the last calm breath I had in me. I'm ready to fight back. 3 days after I sent the full file to Maya, she drove from San Antonio to Austin and sat down at my kitchen table, still in her dark blazer and scuffed flats like she had just walked out of a courtroom. Maya didn't waste time. She opened her laptop and pushed a file titled Preliminary Subject Audit toward me. You need to brace yourself, she said. I ran a background check on the attorney representing Rebecca and your parents. His name's Joseph Banning, right? I nodded. He used to work at Firehurst Wilkins. 4 years ago, he was internally investigated by the state bar for allegedly tampering with inheritance records. He didn't lose his license, but his record is flagged. A guy like that now representing your family in a case like this. That's not a coincidence. I clenched my fingers around my mug of cold tea, my chest tightening like the morning frost on a windshield. Did you find anything else? Maya opened another folder. This one came up when I cross-checked credit activity tied to your address. Rebecca's opened 3 different credit cards over the past 18 months using your home address. Current debt stands at just over $42,000. I stared at the numbers. A part of me wanted to deny it. But deep down, I was used to people building their stories on the pieces they took from me. She's drowning in debt and wrote a whole script to take this house, I said slowly. And she wants to look like the victim if I push back. Maya nodded. There's one more thing. About your grandfather's estate. My head snapped up. My heart skipped. What estate? I thought he only left a small house in Round Rock. There's more, Maya replied. I requested the original file from his law office before he passed. According to the first draft, he created a trust fund split equally between you and Rebecca, worth around $180,000. I froze. No one ever mentioned that. My mom told me the trust was shut down because he didn't update it in time. That's not true, Maya said, her voice tightening. 7 years ago, a new power of attorney was filed transferring the entire inheritance to Rebecca. And the signature on it is yours. I went silent. I never signed anything. Maya slid the scanned copy in front of me. I know. That's why I don't trust anything they claim is legal. This signature's misaligned. The strokes are inconsistent. I sent it for preliminary analysis. Result, over 80% probability of forgery. I couldn't speak. I just sat there in my kitchen, the place where I used to brew tea, bake cookies, repair loose tiles. Once a space that made me feel safe. Now it was becoming the battlefield where old cracks from my past were beginning to surface. That afternoon, I drove to a nursing home more than 10 miles from downtown, the one where Ms. June Whitmore, my grandfather's longtime secretary, now lived. She had been his right hand for everything. Typed every will, filed every trust, safeguarded 3 decades of family paperwork. Her room was small, warm, and smelled faintly of peppermint. Her eyesight had faded and her hands were speckled with age spots, but she gripped mine tight. Josephine, she said softly, I've been waiting, wondering if you'd ever come. I bowed my head, my voice catching. I don't even know what to ask. I just know something's wrong. She nodded gently and pulled open the bottom drawer of her wooden bedside table. She took out a brown envelope, the edges yellowed with age. Your grandfather gave me this 3 weeks before he passed. Told me to give it to you if, one day, things started twisting. And only to you. No one else. I opened the envelope. Inside was a stack of photocopied documents from the bank and the trust office. My name, Rebecca's, the transfer records, all there. And at the bottom, a handwritten note. Slanted script, the kind he used on Christmas cards when I was little. If they take everything from you, at least know you weren't imagining the unfairness. I read the line over and over again, like each reading might lift a little weight off my chest. But the weight didn't lift. It just changed shape. From grief to resolve. I held Ms. June's hand, my eyes wet. Thank you. I won't let them erase me again. The courtroom that day held a tension so thick it felt like everyone was holding their breath. On the plaintiff's side, Rebecca sat flanked by my parents. Her face carefully made up, eyes glistening like morning dew, her hair styled in soft waves. A far cry from the woman I'd seen demand and rage. Today she was the victim and she played it well. Rebecca's attorney began with a soft-spoken opening. His voice was calm, almost like he was telling a sad story to a room of polite schoolchildren. Your Honor, he said, hand resting gently on the case file, this is not just a property dispute. It is the story of a young woman with nowhere else to go, who was cast out of the very home her sister once promised would be a safe place. Rebecca was called to the stand. She walked slowly, deliberately, as if each step carried a burden. When asked why she was suing her sister, she choked up. Because I had no one else, she said through tears. I lost everything. My money, my job, and then, my hope. I truly believed that no matter how hard life got, family would always be there. But she locked the door. In every sense. I didn't move. I sat still in the defendant's chair, my hands resting on the folder Maya had just handed me. My heart wasn't pounding like it had during those early days. What I felt now was more like a still lake. Not because it was calm, but because it was too deep to ripple. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't step up to the stand. Maya presented all the evidence on my behalf, one piece at a time with no drama. Your Honor, she said, her voice calm and almost cold, we do not counter with emotion. We counter with facts. She produced the lease agreement cited by the plaintiff. She placed it on the judge's bench, along with an independent handwriting analysis report. Low signature match, clear signs of digital manipulation. My client's signature was forged. This is not a misunderstanding. This is deliberate fraud. A ripple of whispers spread through the courtroom. I didn't lift my head. Maya continued. We present text messages legally retrieved from a device formerly used by the plaintiff, synced through a shared cloud account. On the large screen behind us, lines of familiar text from Rebecca appeared. She's a pushover. A few tears and she'll hand over the keys. If I play it right, I can stretch this out for at least 6 months. The room fell silent for a few seconds, then came the subtle shifting of glances, hushed murmurs. I could feel Rebecca twitch slightly in her seat, clutching the sheer scarf on her lap. Maya didn't stop. She moved on to the third section, property ownership documents. Your Honor, the home in dispute is part of the Wren Holdings LLC portfolio, legally titled and managed by my client, Mrs. Josephine Grant. The attached list includes 7 additional properties in the same district. She placed a thick file on the stand. The judge flipped through a few pages, brows furrowing. No one responded. No one could. Then Maya presented the final piece of evidence. She opened the laptop we'd prepared, connecting it to the main screen. I knew that video. I had recorded it quietly, passing by the hallway after a preliminary hearing, overhearing my mother speaking to Rebecca, without any attempt to hide her tone. The quieter she stays, the easier she is to control. Once she loses the house, she'll learn who her real family is. My voice wasn't in the video. Just words from the shadows, exposed without interpretation. After the clip, silence fell. Not a sound, just the soft turn of the judge's pages, each one dropping like a stone into an already still pond. Rebecca kept her head down, face pale. My mother turned away. My father stared at the floor as if counting the scratches on the cold tile. I sat there, not pleased, not vindicated, just feeling something inside me finally unlatched. Like the invisible wall I had carried since girlhood, the wall that kept me from standing tall, from speaking up, had started to crack. Not to collapse, but just enough for light to come in. The air in the courtroom as the judge reached for the verdict felt like the air before a thunderstorm. Thick, heavy, just waiting to burst. I watched his hands flip the pages slowly, his silver ring tapping lightly against the oak bench. No one in the room dared to breathe too loud. This court, he began, voice clear, having reviewed all documents, evidence, testimonies, and related factors, finds that the plaintiff was Rebecca Grant, along with Mr. Richard Grant and Mrs. Elaine Grant, deliberately orchestrated and executed a scheme to unlawfully acquire the defendant's property through document forgery, false statements, and abuse of familial relationship. I didn't move. I just listened as each word landed like a compressed heartbeat. The lawsuit is hereby dismissed in full, he continued. The house at 8 Alder Street remains the legal property of the defendant, Mrs. Josephine Grant. All documents submitted by the plaintiff hold no legal standing. I heard a shaky sigh from somewhere behind me. Maybe a reporter. Maybe the court clerk. However, the judge went on, his tone deepening, due to the seriousness of the document forgery, misuse of legal procedures, and the apparent collusion among the plaintiffs, this case will be referred to the Travis County District Attorney's Office for further investigation regarding possible criminal prosecution. I saw Rebecca tremble. Most clearly her hands, those pale pink nails barely hiding inside her sleeves. My mother stared straight at the judge, unblinking. My father kept his head down like he was hearing a sentence meant for himself. The court also notes indications of notary fraud, inheritance tampering, and abuse of legal instruments. If verified in subsequent investigations, these actions may qualify as criminal offenses under Section 32 of the Texas Penal Code. Rebecca turned to her lawyer, muttering something under her breath. Her voice wobbled. The lawyer just stared forward, jaw tight, offering no reply. Maybe he'd seen too many cases like this. Or maybe he knew the door behind him was quietly closing. When the judge finally shut the folder, no one in the room moved. No applause. No crying. Just the soft scrape of a wooden chair as the court clerk began packing up. It felt like a concert ending with no one quite sure when to clap. I walked out of that courtroom without a single person blocking my path, calling my name, or meeting my eyes. I passed by Rebecca, her head down, mascara streaking down her cheeks. My father saw me but didn't nod, didn't speak, just stood still like a statue without a pedestal. That afternoon, I received an email from the bank. All credit accounts opened under Rebecca Grant's name and tied to my home address had been frozen. One was under review for suspected residency fraud tied to reward card applications. The next day, a real estate agency called, informing me that a local bank had initiated foreclosure proceedings on the apartment Rebecca had been renting in the city. She had missed 3 months of payments, not to mention repair fees after she vacated. No one could locate her at the address she had listed. As that address was mine. 3 days later, I was summoned to the notary's office to meet with an investigator regarding the old inheritance authorization. Maya went with me. The side-by-side signature samples were clear. One was mine, the other from someone trying to imitate me. The pen pressure was off, the angle was mismatched, the strokes uneven. The investigator, a silver-haired woman named Margot, looked at me for a long moment after reviewing everything. "You're not the first person to be betrayed by family like this," she said. "But it's rare to find someone with the clarity to preserve every shred of proof like you did." I didn't feel proud. I just felt grateful that I was no longer living in silence. On the 5th day, Maya sent me a civil notice. It stated that a legal team representing the district attorney's office had initiated civil proceedings against Mr. Richard Grant and Mrs. Elaine Grant for their role in colluding to forge documents with the intent to steal property, specifically from me. I read the letter and folded it carefully. I didn't feel joy, just a lightness in my back, as if one part of the weight I'd carried through childhood had finally lifted. That burden, the one I never dared to name, now lived in an official record, written in black ink on white paper. And no one could deny it anymore. I returned home on a quiet Saturday morning. The sunlight slanted gently across the porch roof, spilling over the stone courtyard I had laid by hand. I opened every curtain in the house, letting light pour in without hesitation. The room once labeled family guest room, a name I gave it only because it always stood ready like an unspoken invitation, no longer held its old meaning. I stood in the doorway, my hand resting on the cold wooden wall. Every color patch, every ceiling trim had once been chosen to match someone else's taste. Not anymore. I picked up a brush and selected a new paint. A burnt orange with earthy undertones, warm enough to give the room life but quiet enough to echo the silence of autumn. As the layers dried, I took down the old printed painting, removed the wall clock my mother had given me, the one always running 2 minutes fast, and replaced it with a blank white canvas, waiting for something that truly belonged. I called Nate, a young architect I'd worked with on a redevelopment project years ago. "I need help processing the paperwork to buy the lot next door," I told him. He sounded surprised. "The whole block?" "Yes," I replied calmly. "I want to own it all. And I already have a plan." 3 months later, my name was on the deeds for all 8 adjoining homes, 3 backyards, and 1 vacant warehouse lot at the end of the street. Where there had once been caved-in roofs and windows boarded up with plywood, now stood a cluster of open spaces, with native trees, neutral-toned paint, large glass doors, and smooth concrete floors gentle enough for an elderly person to walk without tripping. I called the project Hollow Wild. Not because it sounded poetic, but because that's exactly how I had felt for years. Hollow and wild, hiding inside roles others expected of me. In the layout, I included a gallery room, a reading lounge, and 2 art studios available for free to women who were single, divorced, or survivors of controlling relationships. Each space came with a small kitchen, large windows, and soundproofed walls. I wasn't building a charity center. I didn't want anyone to feel like a charity case. I wanted them to know this was a place they could start over. No explanations needed. The opening exhibit took place on a light, rainy afternoon. I wore a white button-down shirt with a worn collar, hair tied low, hands holding a warm paper cup of coffee. Not many people showed up, just a few dozen. Mostly neighbors, Maya's friends, and a handful of applicants for the space. I didn't give a speech. I simply stood next to the large painting hung in the center of the room. That painting was an abstract piece I'd created during a sleepless night. The lines intertwined like veins, in shades of smoky purple with deep red undertones. At the center, hand-painted in broad strokes, was a single sentence. Silence isn't surrender. Sometimes it's the first step to rebellion. A woman stood beside me, around 50, with salt and pepper hair, a linen coat, and soft-soled shoes. She didn't ask my name. She just pointed at the sentence and whispered, "I used to think I was weak because I didn't fight back. But now I understand, sometimes just surviving is a form of resistance." I turned to her and nodded. There was nothing more to say. That night I sat alone in the gallery. The warm light reflected off the polished wood floor and the clean white wall behind me. I opened my old notebook to the first page, where I had once scribbled a line in fading ink. If I ever have no place to return to, I'll build one of my own to stand in. I didn't need to write anything after that. Everything that needed to be proven was already here. In these rooms filled with light. In the breeze slipping through an unlocked window. In the silence no longer haunted by fear when someone knocks. In my breath, lighter since the day I dared to call injustice by its real name. I found the letter in the mailbox on an early winter morning, when the wind was still and a layer of silver frost blanketed the wooden porch. The envelope had no return address, but the handwriting on the front, tilted slightly, steady with a slight tremble in the final t, was unmistakable. It was my father's. I didn't open it right away. I carried it inside and set it on the kitchen table, where sunlight through the small window carved a long golden line across the wood. I made a cup of peppermint tea, then sat down and took a deep breath. It had been a long time since I'd felt this kind of hesitation. Not fear. Just unfamiliarity with receiving anything from him, especially something in the form of private words. When I carefully slit the envelope open, a single folded sheet emerged. No date. No greeting. No signature. Just one line. "You were never acknowledged, and now no one can deny you." I don't know what mindset he wrote that in, whether it was guilt or just a reluctant admission. But it didn't matter anymore. Because for the first time, no one demanded an explanation from me. No one asked for forgiveness. No one expected me to hold up a house that had always leaned one way. I stood, walked into the bedroom, and opened the bottom left drawer of the dresser, where I kept an old metal box with a dented corner from a move years ago. On its lid was a strip of masking tape, handwritten in black marker, "Things I survived." I folded the letter into a small square and placed it among the others. A mislabeled credit report, a scanned fake rental contract, a photo of the old will with my name crossed out in pen. None of these made me angry anymore. They were just proof, not for the world but for me, that I'd walked through all those years and remained whole. That afternoon I put on my fabric boots, draped a wool coat over my shoulders, and stepped into the backyard garden. It used to be a patch of rough grass, hardened soil with uneven dips, some soaked with water, others cracked from the sun. But I had dug each trench, planted every root, and turned the earth with bare hands in the early days of rebuilding from ruin. Now one side bloomed with pale lavender, the other with fiery red salvia and golden asters. Down the middle ran a stone path leading to an old bench I had salvaged from a garage sale, now painted ash gray. I stood there facing the garden, hands behind my back, the cold seeping through my coat, but my heart was warm. A gentle breeze stirred, just enough to make the tiny late blooms of daisies tremble. I looked at each flower as if they were old memories finally cleansed. I didn't speak out loud, only whispered to myself, I don't need to win. I just need to be myself, in a place no one can take that away from me. That sentence didn't echo. It didn't drift. It simply dissolved into the air, into the soil, into the bark, the petals, the tiny grains of sand in the garden I had made with both hands, and the part of my life that had never been given a name. And in that place I stood, not as anyone else but as myself. Uncontrolled. Undimmed. Unrewritten. What do you think of my story? Of a woman who simply wanted to hold on to what she had built with her whole life, but had to walk through her own family to do it? Have you ever chosen silence, only to realize you were slowly being erased from your own life? If you've ever felt that way, whether in family, in love, or at work, share it in the comments below. I want to hear your voice. Because sometimes just telling the story and being heard is how we begin to reclaim what was lost. And if you believe that family isn't just blood, but also recognition and respect, don't forget to follow the channel. The upcoming stories will continue to share the lives of ordinary people, standing firm in storms just to keep one thing: themselves.